So what does a case of 2019 novel coronavirus infection look like? So far, from the confirmed cases of the virus infection, the reported illnesses have ranged from people who are very mildly sick to people who are very, very severely ill, and there've also been cases of deaths, as we've seen. The symptoms typically include fever, cough, and shortness of breath. And the WHO estimates that the symptoms of the virus may appear in as few as 2 days or as many as 10 days after first exposure. This estimate, however, is based on what is known about similar respiratory viruses. Now, the Lancet just recently published a paper by some Chinese researchers who described the clinical features of the first 41 laboratory confirmed cases that they got in China. And they found that of these 41 people, all of them had pneumonia. About a third had developed acute respiratory distress syndrome requiring intensive care. 5 had acute cardiac injury, 4 required ventilation, and 6 of them died. Now, the authors have cautioned against using these data to make conclusions about the risk of death, since, as I explained at the beginning of the epidemic, there would have been a high bias towards detecting severe cases. So in this case, we see 6 out of 41 cases. That's 15%. So the death rate here is 15%. But if we go back to the global data that we had before, we have 132 deaths out of 665, which is about 2%. So we have to be very cautious. To date, there is not enough knowledge about the epidemiology of this virus to draw definitive conclusions about the full clinical features of the disease, the intensity of human-to-human transmission, or the original source of the outbreak. However, scientists are working at an unprecedented rate, and the whole puzzle is being very quickly put together, and I have no doubt that very soon we will have a fuller picture of what is going on. In the meantime, what we do know about the virus, what do we know about the virus itself? So I'll start with a very simple question to get us rolling. What is a virus? So people take it for granted that they know what a virus is, and then they tell you that they're going to take an antibiotic for the virus, which is not going to work because it's not a bacterium. So so what is a virus? So viruses are basically small infectious agents that replicate only inside of the living cells. So they have to be in the cell of an organism. And they affect all different life forms. They infect animals, plants, microorganisms. And there are many, many, many different types of viruses, and some of these are associated with disease. For example, all of the viruses that I've shown here on the right are associated with diseases in humans, except for the one called the bacteriophage, which you can, as the name says, it infects bacteria. So all of those are human viruses that we're familiar with. Other examples of viruses that we're familiar with in our region would be dengue, chikungunya, and Zika viruses. Now, viruses vary in the way that they're transmitted from one person to another, and some require, so for example, some might require direct contact with an infected person. Others are spread through eating contaminated food or via contact with droplets or residue from droplets created, for example, when somebody sneezes or when they cough. So now we know what a virus is. The next question is, what are coronaviruses? Now, don't let this slide put you off. It's a little busy, but I'll walk you through. So there are many members of this family. So the coronavirus is a large, diverse family of respiratory viruses. The whole family is known as the Coronaviridae. Now, I mentioned respiratory viruses. By respiratory virus, I mean that they infect the nose and the lungs, causing a wide spectrum of diseases, of illnesses ranging from mild colds or severe and all the way down to severe pneumonia. The coronavirus family is divided into alpha, beta, delta, and gamma coronaviruses. And this table shows examples of each. And as I said, don't get carried away with the long names shown there. What I want to do is I want you to take note of the range of different animals in which these coronaviruses are found. So if you look at the names, you'll see murine, meaning mouse, or you'll see human or bat. And at the bottom, around the edges of this slide, I've shown pictures of all the different types of animals that are mentioned, and you can see that it's very diverse. Now, I've highlighted some of the viruses in blue and red. Those are the ones that infect humans, and they are all associated with respiratory illness. But the 4 that are in blue are very common viruses. They circulate all the time, and they're mostly cause mild disease, such as colds and influenza-like illness. In fact, about 5 to 12% of all influenza-like illness is thought to be caused by these seasonal, they're known as seasonal coronaviruses. Those that are highlighted in bold red, the ones down here, are associated with outbreaks, and they include outbreaks that include significant numbers of severe cases and deaths. I mentioned SARS coronavirus before. This one here is the Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome coronavirus, or MERS. It's less familiar to most people, but it has resulted in fatalities comparable to SARS. Now, the transmission, the way that MERS is transmitted is very different from how SARS is transmitted, and that has led it to be, the outbreaks to be different. The outbreaks are more self-limiting, and they've so far been restricted to the Arabian Peninsula. We'll come back to those in a while. And then we have the 7th coronavirus, human coronavirus, the 2019 novel coronavirus. Some people refer to it as a Wuhan coronavirus.